Hey, it's Andy with Agent Insider. Thanks for joining me this week. Today, I want to talk about claims, the risky business of insurance, which is why I do insurance and what insurance is all about. So in general, just kind of set some ground rules on what insurance is. I know I've talked about this in episodes before, but I think it's always good to just kind of come back and re-remind people why insurance and what it's all about. Really, insurance is risk transfer. I was meeting with an accountant the other day. We were going over some stuff on his insurance, and he's trying to weigh out like what deductible he should have and whether or not he would want to have accident forgiveness now that he's adding a teen driver on to his policy. And as he's trying to weigh out all the dollar amounts and how much it would affect his premium if the teen driver has an accident, he goes, well, I guess really all we're talking about is how much risk I want to take versus how much risk I want the insurance company to take. I was like, it's exactly what insurance is, right? So you're just transferring that risk. So as we start talking about claims today, just remember, insurance is you're transferring a risk from yourself to the insurance company, and you're doing that for a premium, right? So the insurance company charges you X amount, the premium's X amount, and in exchange for that transfer of risk, they take that risk and you pay the premium. So obviously the more premium you pay, given that the policy's done right and you're not just getting scammed, but as long as you're working with a reputable company, reputable agency, typically the more premium you pay, the more risk is being transferred to the insurance company, and the lower the premiums is going to be less risk transferred to the insurance company, right? So a higher deductible means you're taking a bigger risk and the insurance company is taking a smaller risk. Or if you have exclusions on your policy, you're taking a bigger risk and the insurance company is taking a smaller risk. And in exchange for the exclusions and the higher deductibles, your premiums get reduced. So that's really like in a nutshell when you're kind of thinking about like how much should I pay for my insurance, or how high should my deductible be? Just kind of think about it in those terms. Is what are you comfortable with for your risk versus what you're comfortable paying the insurance company to take the risk for? So let's dive into some claims scenarios where we can see that risk transfer take place. One of our customers, they had a commercial auto policy of a business. And on that commercial auto policy, there's options. You can have a named driver policy where you have to name every driver that's going to be driving, or they're not covered. And some companies do that. Whether you realize they do that or not, it's actually built into the policy where if you don't list that driver on the policy and then they get into an accident. So the company that we had them placed with did not have a named driver endorsement where you had to have everyone named. And thankfully so, because their son took the vehicle without their knowledge, without their permission, went out joyriding, got into a horrible accident that thankfully he was okay, the son was, but seriously injured another party. Now, the insurance pays out $1 million to this other party for their injuries. The transfer there of that risk, right, where you go, hey, all of a sudden that premium that I was paying, of X number of dollars looks like a good deal in response to that claim that just got paid out. But the bad part about that is, right, so that now the second part of that scenario, the renewal time, when that comes up for the policy, these claims affect you. And then they look at that and go, okay, well, what's the management of the business? Because they go, the unlisted youthful driver had access to the vehicle, was able to take the vehicle and get out into a major accident with a major payout. Not an attractive risk from an insurance standpoint. So now your premiums are drastically impacted. So the risk transfer worked because we transferred the risk of that $1 million lawsuit from the business owner and the parents to the insurance company. On the flip side now, part of that risk transfer, now that the insurance company goes, that the risk is a lot higher than what we anticipated. Now the premiums go up significantly. And that's why the premiums were going up significantly after a claim, because the risk factor on those policies, on that particular account changes drastically. So some other ones I wanted to talk about is there was a hole, another company, business insurance, working they're doing plumbing at a restaurant, and they had to open up a hole to be able to access a drain pipe and be able to repair it, clean it out. The hole's opened up and the guy goes out of it to his truck, leaves it as he's having lunch and getting parts. An employee of the business that he was working at falls into that hole and gets injured. Now, you would say, well, that's their own fault. They should have paid attention. And in some aspects, like I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that synopsis of thinking like, hey, you should watch where you're walking. But when liability comes up, you go, hey, did you take due care to prevent somebody from falling into that hole? So now you have another risk. And this is really, when you think about it, I tell people the risks that you're taking, you can gamble on yourself, but when you're in a business, you're gambling on all of your employees, right? If you own the business, whatever your employees do is putting you at risk. If you have other drivers in your household on a personal policy, your children, your spouse, maybe a parent or some other relative or friend or anybody that you let borrow your car, you're taking on that risk of who that driver is and what they do behind the wheel because you own the vehicle and you gave them permission to drive it. So there's risk transfer. Again, this open hole, employee falls into it, significant injury is up for debate between lawyers and doctors. But the owner of the business is now exposed. The premium that they've been paying every month for their business insurance is that transfer of risk. So even though they felt exposed, you're like, oh my gosh, we're getting sued, that risk was transferred to the insurance company. The insurance company takes care of the claim, defends the business, pays out to the employee that was injured, makes it go away, operate it as intended. So that's really, like, there's so many scenarios where people don't think about it, where there's risk. And then the question comes back, do you want the risk or do you want to transfer the risk? Another one that's very common that I talk with people about a lot, and maybe it's because people don't understand this issue yet, but it's going to become a bigger and bigger problem, is the risk transfer or the exposure of employment-related practices, EPLI, employment-related practices, insurance. And that's going to cover things. So the risk there is something that happens between an employer and an employee, or a manager and an employee, or sometimes even an employee to a customer or a customer to an employee, depending on how you structure your policy. What that comes up with is things like these, and these are common exclusions across the board on all general liability policies. It's not going to cover employment-related stuff, so EPLI is excluded, and that's going to be failure to, like refusal to hire. So it's like you don't hire somebody, and it's not a legitimate reason not to hire them, and they sue you because they say, hey, you're discriminating against me based on X, Y, and Z. So refusal to hire, wrongful dismissal, harassment, sexual harassment, or verbal harassment. It doesn't have to be sexual. It could just be harassment. And those things become a big issue because a lot of it's perception. So I could perceive that somebody's treating me differently based on my gender, my ethnicity, my accent or no accent, right? Like where I'm from, who my family is. Whether that's actually true or not, I could perceive that. I make a claim against the business, and now the business is forced to defend themselves. And if heaven forbid, there was a legitimate claim to be made there, the payout could be significant. And then you go, well, I'm very good about documenting, and I'm very good about making sure that I cross my T's, dot my I's. So that's great. So you're saying, I don't want to transfer that risk. I will take that risk because it's a risk that I feel like I'm in control of, and I feel like it's a good risk for me to take. And that makes sense. The part that I would say maybe to be aware of inside of that is if you have employees and the general public interacting, that creates a whole different dynamic. Or if you have managers interacting with your employees, it creates a different dynamic. So you could have, like, I use this example often as a restaurant. You have a restaurant where the waitress or your server is being harassed by a patron. Even though you don't condone it, and then you become aware of it and you say, hey, you have to leave. You can't come back because you're not treating our staff with respect. So you're doing the things that you think you should do to protect your staff and provide a safe environment. But that doesn't mean that the staff member doesn't have a claim, because if they were harassed, they can say it's an unsafe work environment. There's a lot of different things that can come up. And so that, or if they do something towards an employee and towards a customer, they make an off-color joke or making some sort of insinuative comment. And now all of a sudden the customer comes back against the business because of what the employee said. Those are risks that you have as a business owner that you have to decide, am I okay to just take that risk myself, or should I transfer that to the insurance company? And I don't know if there's a right answer for that. A lot of it comes down to, what is your feeling on risk management? Do you feel comfortable with exposing, on typical defense of a frivolous lawsuit in that space is $50,000 to $75,000, of course, subject to change from year to year, but that's on average, national average. So are you comfortable to say, hey, I got $100,000 set aside that if something comes up, I'll just defend myself? Or do you say, and if something significant came up, I'm okay with the risking of $1 million to $2 million? Or do you say, nope, I'm going to buy that insurance for $1,000 and transfer that risk to the insurance company? So there's so many things that can come up in those claims. And every scenario, when you think about insurance, there's going to be limitations and exclusions. And you can decide how many limitations, exclusions you want on your policy versus how many you want to pay for to have removed. So it's all about risk transfer. A couple other claim scenarios I wanted to just touch base on, kind of shift over to personal lines type of claims. One that comes up often, and we're kind of going into the fall time here pretty soon, depending when you listen to this podcast, but as we're recording it here in the next month or so, storms start coming through, the winds pick up, the Northeast starts blowing. And one of the big things that comes up is trees. So your tree blows down on the neighbor's house, who's at fault? Or your neighbor's tree blows down on your house, who's at fault? Whose insurance is going to cover that? And it seems like whoever owns the tree should have to pay for the damage to my house, right? So if my tree blew on my house, I pay for it. If your tree blows on my house, you pay for it. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily how it works. And I've seen this actually play out in real claim scenarios. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So we had one where the guy had a bunch of trees, didn't prune them often. The neighbor was like, dude, your trees are going to hit my cars or my house, do something. And he's like, yeah, whatever. And he doesn't do anything. Trees come down, damage like 4 of the guy's cars in a windstorm. So he wants the neighbor. He's like, hey, I warned you, you should take care of those trees. And so they opened a claim on the homeowner's policy for liability against the neighbor. The adjuster comes back and says, hey, do you have proof, certified letter saying that you thought those trees were endangering your cars? I was like, well, no, I told him that verbally. And he's like, well, unless you can prove you told him that, or you have a certified letter saying that that is the case, that's just the wind blew, the tree fell. The tree was not obviously sick, so it's not his liability. It goes under your own car insurance. And that is how it works. On the flip side, and I did have this happen once where somebody had sent that letter, the certified letter, because I told them like, hey, if you feel like that tree is a danger to your property, you have to send it to them via certified letter. Now, you can't make anybody do something with the tree on their own property, but if you send them that certified letter that says, I feel like your tree is a danger to my property, please take appropriate action. You're not telling them what to do. You just say, take appropriate action. If they do nothing, and now that tree blows down and hits your property, their insurance will cover that. The liability will cover that because you gave them notice. You're like, hey, I feel like this is a threat. They did nothing. Their negligence caused your injury, and it would go under their liability. So something to be aware of when it comes to trees around your property. If it's your tree, if somebody says something to you, be careful. Make sure that you hey, take it seriously. And if you feel like someone else's tree is a danger to yours, your property, make sure you send it to them in letter. And you can even tell them hey, tell them it's the insurance agent that made you do it, or something along those lines, that you don't necessarily want to come across as a bad neighbor. But typically you can have a discussion first. And if they don't respond, I would definitely think about talking to your insurance agent, seeing if it's the same in your state where you might be. But typically that's going to be what you need to do, is send a certified letter. So other thing to think about here as we're coming into the winter time here in a couple of months, we're a little ways away from freezing. It's really hot today, so it's hard to think about, we're going into the cold season and winter time. When it comes to claims, one of the very common claims that we get is frozen pipes. And usually we're going to you get a cold snap, people were unprepared, and pipes freeze, burst, and cause water damage. And it can be significant. So make sure that you guys kind of be ahead of the curve on that. Because a lot of people, some people, unfortunately, they kind of take the approach of well, that's what insurance is for. That's what I pay these premiums for. I'm transferring my risk to the insurance company. And that's true. Back to the whole idea of risk transfer. So the insurance company will pay for a frozen pipe that bursts and causes damage. Typically, although there are some policies that have exclusions on them that exclude water damage or from frozen pipes, exclude all water completely regardless of the cause. So again, checking with your policy, there might be some exclusions on there, but typically those things would be covered. But when you transfer that risk and they go, okay, you had a claim that not everybody else had, you're a higher risk account now than other accounts, which is going to affect your premiums and the eligibility for different programs. So it's something to be aware of, right? Preventing claims is better than just having that idea of I've transferred the risk, and so I don't have to worry about it. I would say everyone is a risk manager, whether you realize it or not. You're managing your risk and trying to prevent claims, and then transfer the risk that you're not comfortable taking on as your own exposure. And that's really the basis of what insurance does. We come in and pick up those gaps of where you don't feel comfortable. You say, I'm going to manage my risk and try to prevent the claim. And I'm okay with accepting this much risk, but I'm not okay with accepting this much risk. So that's where insurance company comes in to fill in the gaps. Hopefully that's helpful, just kind of thinking through how claims work, how risk management works for you. So hopefully that's helpful for you guys today. If you have questions, feel free to shoot me an email at theagentinsider@gmail.com. Happy to answer those questions. Or if you have things that you want us to try to fit into future podcasts to answer, topics that you want to have addressed, feel free to email us on those as well. So until next time, guys, thanks so much and have a great day.